All right, welcome everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to explore an interesting issue tonight on the borders of Israel and a little bit more. This is a very auspicious Torah reading. First of all, it's Chazak. It's the end of Sefer Bamidbar, which is a very fascinating, wonderful Sefer, travels of Am Yisrael through the desert, which are fast coming to a close. Matot Maseh is also the longest Torah reading in the Torah. Now, that's a good trivia question for you to know. Some people may come forward and dispute that and say, no, Vayakel Pekude, when it comes out together with Parshat HaChodesh and all kinds of other suggestions, but no, they're wrong. Matot Maseh has the greatest number of psukim, and it's even greater this week because this Shabbat is, of course, Rosh Chodesh. So we are adding to the mix. So it's indisputable, even for those who would try to dispute. Matot Maseh is a long and can be a difficult reading, although there is a lot of repetition. Nevertheless, it's a very full parsha, and we're going to try to say a few words about a general statement about Matot Maseh, because Moshe's life is, in a sense, coming to an end. I mean, we have a whole other sefer of Devarim, but that's what we call Mishnah Torah. That's more or less a repetition. There are new mitzvot there, but it's considered to be kind of a recap or wrapping up of what we've learned previously. So here Moshe, I think, is at a very special moment, and he's on the verge of making his farewell speech starting next week. But now he wants to perhaps, it's kind of, there are two endings. The end of Bamidbar is, in a sense, the end of Moshe's active life, and then the end of Devarim caps everything off. So Moshe wants to kind of close up any of the loose ends and summarize his hope for the nation in our own land. So there are a number of subjects that really focus on that idea of Moshe coming to grips, although he is not going to come into Eretz Yisrael, but he is very proud and hopeful that we are coming to our own land. So he's going to talk about a number of things that impact upon that issue. Well, it starts with the obligation to fulfill vows. And one would think that, what does that have to do with the rest of the Parsha? But I suggest that Moshe had taken a vow, a shavua, that he was going to redeem Bnei Israel, and he was going to lead them to the Holy Land. That was when he was finally talked into it by Hashem. Moshe took that to be his mission and his crusade, if you will, that come what may, he would lead us to the land. And so he has fulfilled that vow now. And so he stops to record all the different places we came to along the way. And there, for Moshe, of course, these memories of all the things that happened there, the highs and the lows, but he wants to recall what a unique journey it was. So therefore, a great deal of the double Sedra is devoted to those 42 places we went to as we left Egypt until we reached the banks of the Jordan, of the Nahar Yarden. And he talks about the battle with Midian. There were a lot of battles that we fought. We faced Amalek and Ammon and Moab, Og, Melech HaBashan, and Sichon. But he chooses here to talk about Midian. First of all, it's closing that chapter on the kind of dastardly duo of Moab and Midian, of Balak and Bilam, who tried to destroy us. And his message, I think, is eternal. And he's saying to us, there will be wars. And sometimes you have to be brutal. So he has this statement that he makes that people sometimes draw upon, where he says, in kind of exasperation and amazement, you let the women live? Because this is one of those wars where the women needed to be punished. It wasn't always that in all the wars, but in this case, this was a total fight to the finish against Midian, because they had led us into idolatry and kind of exposed about us a tragic flaw that we sometimes have of a sexual nature. And when we let the morality drop, we are the most vulnerable. So this was kind of an example. If they, you'll pardon the expression, hit us below the belt, then we can hit them below the belt, even go after the women. He makes reference to the traumatic incident with Reuben and Gad, where, and we've talked about this, the oft-quoted statement that Moshe makes, will our brothers, our soldiers go out to war, and you will remain here, to these 2.5 tribes that wish to stay on the east of the Jordan, of the Yarden, Trans-Jordan, Aver HaYarden. And it's kind of a mixed bag. It causes, and I'll mention this later too, it causes a fragmentation of the nation when 2.5 tribes say, we're going to, in a sense, break ranks, even though they do agree to fight and stay on the other side for 14 years to join with the 9.5 other Shvatim. But nevertheless, it was a bit demoralizing. They had their reasons. They felt disenfranchised. We don't have to go into it now, but it was something that really got Moshe angry. And Moshe had this propensity to sometimes get angry for righteous causes, for good causes, even though it was usually problematic and detrimental for him to do so. It may even be the reason why he wasn't allowed into Eretz Yisrael, because of the anger he displayed at the striking of the rock in Mei Meriva. But here, certainly, this is justified anger. Finally, there is an agreement made that these 2.5 tribes will nevertheless join for the hard part of conquering the land. On the other hand, there's somewhat of a kind of a blessing in this as well, in that they established Jewish residence and thus ancestral possession of the area that's on the east of the Jordan. Talk about that in a moment when we talk about borders. The end comes of Perek, 33rd Perek, and you see how prophetic and timely the Torah always is. Hashem, Moshe records and is speaking for Hashem when he says that as you cross into this new land, Vorashtem et kol yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, you have to drive out the inhabitants, and you have to destroy their idolatrous places and demolish their idols, because, first of all, they had a culture that was perverse and would ultimately bring us down and degrade us. But Moshe says, remember, at the end of the day, this is your land. Rashi brings at the very beginning of the Torah that the Torah begins with creation, so that the Jewish people will understand God owns the land, controls the land, and when he says it belongs to us, that's the final word. And then he says something that has become obviously very, very apparent to us. Im lo torishu et yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, if you don't drive out the people living there, and asher totiru mehem, those that remain will be sikim be'enechem, needles in your eyes, v'litzninim b'tzidechem, and they will be thorns, literally thorns in your side, an expression we've heard before, v'tzararu etchem. You might, some want to translate this word v'tzararu, because it's hard to translate a tzadi into English, as v'tzaru etchem, that they will terrorize you. And this could be one of the first instances of the word for terror. And then this very powerful phrase Moshe ends here with, Vayak asher dimiti lasot lahem esel lachem. And God has said, that which I meant to do to them, I shall do to you, unless you rid the land of them. So they're very, very strong kind of charge to us that if we let them remain in the land, it's only going to mean endless trouble for us. But I think what I take from this as well, a further statement about the partnership of man and God, of the Jewish people and Hashem, that Hashem says, you must take care of them and do this in order for me to bless you with only good things. Hashem's not going to do it himself. It's something that we have to do in order to fulfill our end of the bargain. The Parsha talks about the cities of the Levi'im, the 48 cities, that there should be holiness in every city. The only thing I can think compares to this is Chabad, of having Chabad houses all over. So the Levi'im would be spread out in order to bring some spirituality to all the different cities. And then the Benot Tzlafchad, repeating again this story, which we've really had already, but the Torah repeats it, I think, again, because we are emphasizing the centrality of the land of Israel in this Parsha. So we come back to the story of the Benot Tzlafchad to emphasize that it's very proper and it's deserving of reward for those who have love of the land. Sometimes I think that's a lesson we can learn from the Arabs, because they have a deep affinity and connection to the land, which is something that is an important trait that we have to have as well. And therefore, we recognize the intrinsic value of the land, just like the daughters of Tzlafchad did, not just for a real estate deal, but because they understand that the essence of connecting to a land is when it belongs to you, literally and figuratively. And that's what the story of the Benot Tzlafchad come to teach us. And so let's come back now. So I think in summation, Moshe is kind of taking a big look, the big picture of history, and he's telling us, we will unite as a people. We've set out on this long, long journey, and it will continue now that we come to the land of Israel, a much longer journey than the 40 years in the desert. We'll follow the Torah, we'll do our mitzvot, but our mission will not be complete until we take back our land and connect all of us with Eretz Yisrael. And that is the crowning touch, which can't be accomplished in the Galut, in exile. You can learn Torah, you can believe in Hashem, but there's a missing piece of that triangle. And it stems from creation. Abraham, we're told that when he went to the Machpelah, he already smelled the scent of the Garden of Eden, because that was coming straight. The Gan Eden was by tradition in Eretz Yisrael. And so taking that piece of land and that first attempt, or that successful attempt, to hold on to a piece of land in Eretz Yisrael was something that was destined from creation. The Torah, the Parsha here of Moshe goes through the borders. It's not the first time we have the borders in the Torah. The first time that happens is when Hashem promises the land to Avram Avinu and says, the pasuk says, on that day, God made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your offspring, I will assign this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. That's a very wide swath of territory. And if taken literally, it would include parts of Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and even Turkey. So that's a lot of land. So the Meforshim come in and tell us that it's not to be taken that literally. we know, for example, although the Rambam differed with this, and he held that Cairo was part of the ancestral land, but the Nile, we know the Nile is in Egypt, and we left Egypt for the Holy Land. So if the Nile and Egypt would have been part of Eretz Israel, then maybe we would have stayed there, but we left. And so therefore we say that can't count as part of Israel. There's a dispute about almost all of these places. Some identify this river of Egypt as Wadi El Arish, which is an oasis close to Israel. The northern border, and in Lamed Daled, we talk about the different borders, and the southern border from the wilderness of Tzin, all kinds of places, Malay Akrabim, the spider's path, and the northern border at Sifron, Shfam. There are all kinds of places that we're not really sure today where all of them were. But essentially, the northern border, it includes, first of all, the Great Sea. That, I think we can be clear, is the Mediterranean. And the border there extends from the Mediterranean to the Kinneret. And that includes the Golan Heights, by the way. It does not include much of, if not most of Syria. Damascus was a country that, Damascus was actually the capital of Aram. And that was a country, among the oldest cities in history is Damascus. So that was already there. Another place that is mentioned in talking about the borders is Hor Hahar. Now you'll remember that that is where Aaron is buried. But most authorities say that something different is meant here, or there were two places with the same name, that this is talking probably about Har Hermon, and that is also part of our borders, that the northern border is extended to Har Hermon. Now, Har Hermon is a very large area. We only control, now we control a little bit more, thank God, but we're only controlling less than 20%. So there is, that mountain range is quite large. Southern Lebanon was also part of ancient Israel. Not all of Lebanon. We see that that country is around also. We get the cedar from Hiram, the king of Lebanon. Shlomo makes a deal with him. So we see they did have their own autonomous country as well. And the lands which correspond to the territories of Asher and Naphtali, as well as a piece of Dan, these extended into what we know as Lebanon today. It's intriguing, by the way, and for those who don't know this, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, he wanted to annex this territory to Israel. And he had a great vision of what should happen in ideal terms, which he actually presented to the European powers, the great powers. And just to go over it a little bit, he said he thought Iraq would get the east bank of the Jordan and promise to settle the Palestinian refugees there, taking care of that problem and hopefully making peace with Israel, a large chunk of land to live on. Some would say that that actually exists. I'll come back to that. The West Bank, he said, should be attached to Israel as a semi-autonomous region. Lebanon had a large Muslim population in the south, so he suggested Israel expand up to the Litani River. We still use that as a kind of border in times of difficulty. And that would turn Lebanon into a more compact Christian state, and they would be happy. The Suez Canal area, he suggested, would have an international status, which we know that it lost under Nasser, while the Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba would come under Israeli control to ensure freedom of navigation. Unfortunately, the Allies did not go for this, and it would have been fantastic because many problems stemmed from the failure to pursue that vision. We know that Nasser took the Suez and basically caused the 56 war to break out. Lebanon would be ruined by Islamic fanaticism, and Jordan becomes an artificial Hashemite minority state, and the Palestinians feel that we got nothing. Had they been given that as a state originally, without this minority, then maybe they would have felt, okay, we got our piece of the pie. The Torah says that Israel's eastern boundary descends from the Jordan River and ends at the Dead Sea. And we have said before that the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Chatzi Manasseh, they settled this territory east of the Jordan, even though it was not part of the promised land. It wasn't included initially. The Torah implies the southern boundary is the Dead Sea. Now, in many places, the Tanakh states that Beersheba is the southernmost city in Israel, which means that most of the Negev was not originally part of our borders, neither was Eilat on the Red Sea. I'll come back to that in a moment. According to all opinions, the Gaza Strip and the area of Yamit are also included in the borders that the Israelites coming out of Egypt were commanded to conquer and included as part of the portion of Shevet Yehuda. As it is written, quoting from Yoshua, and Aza with its surrounding towns and settlements as far as Nachal Mitzrayim and the border of the Mediterranean Sea are part of Israel. Rav Melamed comments and says, why did we not conquer the entire land? Because our numbers were insufficient to settle the entire land. So first we settled in the primary parts of the land on the west side of the Yarden and gradually spread to all parts of the country. But after Reuben and Gad asked to receive their inheritance on the eastern side of the Yarden, although they joined for the initial battle to conquer the country, Moshe agreed to their request reluctantly, and the result was that the other tribes now lacked the strength to entirely conquer all the territories of the borders mentioned in our Parsha. And you see here the consequences of disunity, why Moshe was so angry that had we had all 12 tribes together from the start, we might have been able to conquer the entire country. But you see with the war that's going on now, it's very, very difficult to conquer Aza, and it has been throughout history. And for whatever reason, we see the kings and the generals who tried it before did not succeed. Perhaps it's something that Hashem is saying will only come at the end of time. Perhaps it's a reminder that this is what happens when we're not unified. But it's been that thorn in our sides ever since we entered the land of Israel. When Israel had sovereignty, then it had the ability to take over other land, and that land then became Holy Land. This is similar to the Arab belief as well, where Muslims settle, that becomes Islamic land. We have the same concept. So Shlomo in particular, Melech Shlomo, he expanded the borders primarily in the south. The Negev and Eilat, we know about Timnah, for example, and Yirmiyahu prophesizes that in the time of Moshiach, and maybe that's the time we're in now, all of the ancient tribes will return to their ancestral borders, building up our strength, implying that Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi Manasseh will then return to their lands east of the Jordan. And then when these lost tribes, so to speak, or lost Jews, we can call them, comes back, the land will expand. Like we say, Eretz HaTzvi, the deer whose skin expands to fit the deer's body no matter how much it eats. And then at that time, our population will grow and predicted to be at least twice what it is now, that with all the tribes living together, we reach a population of as much as 14 million, Bezrat Hashem. This is where we are at today. We, Baruch Hashem, we conquered the land more than once, reconquered the land, and were able to reclaim much of our ancestral heritage. Not all of it, obviously. 2/3 of what we were initially promised by the British was taken away from us, so that we don't nearly have what we could have had. Nevertheless, We have expanded the land somewhat with the Golan Heights, obviously, and expanding into the Negev and other places as well. And so we definitely have come close to the fulfillment of these prophecies. We journeyed far and wide for a long, long time, but now we have finally come back to our own land. We fought very valiantly to gain it. We're still fighting very valiantly to keep it. And that's something that all of us have to do, each and every one of us, in one way or the other. We have to contribute to this national effort in order to bring us closer to full autonomy and full control of our land, and ultimately a situation where the world recognizes it. The package cannot be perfect until all three sides of this triangle will be complete: the people, the Torah, the land. So we have to work at all of them, living in Israel, following the Torah, and uniting together as one people in fulfillment of Hashem's path of life. That ultimately is what we need to do to fulfill this ancient prophecy that Moshe said will come true someday. We will, he designates 3 cities of refuge on the other side of the Yarden, even though we didn't have the land then. He said, don't worry, it will all come true. Once the journey has begun, it will not end until we achieve this final geula that we hope we are now in the midst of. So we'll finish with this bracha for our soldiers, with the hope that the hostages can come back. Every week we talk about a deal semi being made. Let's hope this week we come up with something that is a bona fide and advantageous agreement. Mishaberach Abateinu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov V'Yivorech Chayalei Tzva Hagana Yisrael Hamdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Arei Eloheinu Migvul HaLevanon Ad Bimar Mitzrayim U'Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Lavo Arava V'Yabasha V'Avir U'Bayam Yitein Adonai Toivenu Akamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayaleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah Mikol Nega U'Machala Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha B'Chol Ma'aseh Ydehem Yadber Son'enu Tachtehem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua Bater Nitzachon B'Kriyamhem HaKatuv Yadonai Elohechem Aleichem Lachem Lilachem Lachem Imoivechem L'Shirchem V'Nomar Amen. To everybody, Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov. We should see a year in which Tisha B'Av, as we begin the 9 days, is retransformed into a day of Simcha, into a Moed of celebration, instead of one of sadness and commemoration of tragedy. We should have only Besorot Tovot. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for tuning in.